Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Beyond Autism's Lunch and Learn series. If you are new here, then hello. It's lovely to have you guys. And if you have watched a couple of these before, then thank you so much for coming back. Before we get started, it would be really lovely for you to pop in the chat whether you're a parent or a professional, whereabouts you're listening from, and if you are a professional, just what your job role is. Be quite nice to kind of see what our reach looks like and who's joined us today. So this is our 14th session of the series, and today we will be speaking about further resources and approaches for pathological demand avoidance, also known as PDA. We have a part 1 to this that we delivered last year. So if you haven't seen that, definitely go and check that out afterwards. I did deliver that as well. So definitely go and have a look at that. That was a little bit more sort of an introductory session on just what sort of PDA is and what it looks like. A couple of those slides have been adapted and put into this session as well, just to give a little bit of a recap if you did join last time and you might have forgotten or joined a couple of other Lunch and Learns. It would be nice for you to get a refresher. My name is Cynthia Carrier, and I'm an outreach consultant and a behaviour analyst for Beyond Autism. So we'll get cracking and get right into it. Let's move on. Okay. So what we're going to be covering today is what demands are and what they could potentially look like for our young people, our children, our clients, our pupils. Characteristics of PDA, understanding your child's PDA profile, so whether that's your child or a pupil in your school. Practical and home-based strategies for parents, carers and families, and then we'll look at some clinical and educational strategies also for professionals. Okay, so just a little bit of a recap on what we spoke about in the last PDA session. For those that don't know, pathological demand avoidance is not currently a separate diagnosis to autism. However, autistic people can have a PDA profile linked with their diagnosis. Now, there are some local authorities and agencies that don't diagnose PDA profiles, and the work and understanding on PDA is still being massively developed to this day. We're really still trying to understand PDA and its connection and kind of the links and what that could look like for neurotypical people in general. So we can categorize demands into 3 main categories. The first that we've got is direct demands. So an instruction such as put your coat on or sit on the carpet could be deemed as quite demanding for an individual. We also have indirect or implied demands, so questions that require an answer, or for example, if food is put in front of you, you then know you've got that expectation to have to eat it. That could be quite demanding for an individual. We also have sort of internal demands, so that's our willingness to do something for ourselves. So those are internal needs like being hungry, thirsty, needing the toilet, or having that intrinsic feeling of wanting to fit into a social setting or into a group. Going back to the second one, I just want to sort of add an example in there of for some people, even sort of communication methods and communication systems can be demanding. So having visuals available and out on the table or AAC devices can be deemed as quite demanding. And if we're thinking about, trying to build on skills of our pupils and functional communication, that can be a really big barrier. And a little bit later on, we'll speak on some sort of strategies to support that. Some common characteristics for autistic people with a PDA profile include resisting and avoiding typical day-to-day demands, even if it is something that is in part of their repertoire and part of their daily routine. Having the need or a sense of predictability, which can sort of almost work 2 ways. So having predictability might work really well and having that structure, but the structure itself and having to actually action that might be a little bit too demanding for them. Mood swings or inflexibility, fixated or focused on a particular individual, object or subject. What you might see in a school setting is an individual having a favourite teacher and finding it really tricky if that teacher, for example, isn't in, or you're seeing a higher likelihood of behaviours of concern occurring if the environment looks different to what they're used to. Difficulties with executive functioning, so sometimes maybe grasping schedules or structures, so having that need for that predictability and that need for stability, but finding it quite difficult to grasp the schedule of it. We also have need for choices, and then may appear sort of sociable, but difficulties with receptive language. So that's sort of our understanding of communication and having that information go in and processed for us. Well, it's not sort of, PDA isn't limited to these characteristics, but these are some of the more typical ones that you might see in your PDA children. However, there's a lot out there that speaks about sort of the challenges of PDA and how people can sort of struggle with understanding PDA or live sort of day to day with having sort of the difficulties of those demands. However, there are many strengths that come with PDA that we should, speak about and celebrate. So I've listed a few here. So we've got being really creative, compassionate, and being really caring. Being really independent and having that autonomy and being in control of their day and what they want to do. Being really charismatic and sort of funny. Being really determined and sticking for what they believe. Being honest, being inquisitive, talented, passionate, loving, imaginative, and brave. And if you've got a pupil at the moment or a child at the moment with a PDA profile, or you suspect that they've got PDA, it can become really sort of overwhelming trying to understand those strategies that work better for them and how you can increase their quality of life. An activity that I've done with sort of staff teams in the past is, let's think about that child's strengths. They've got the PDA profile, but what makes them really special with that PDA profile, and how are they unique? How can we celebrate that? How can we promote that? So if you're sort of having a little bit of a moment, you feel a little bit stuck on strategies and to support, have a little discussion with the team and set up a little activity where we're thinking about the strengths of that child's profile and how we can really incorporate that into their learning, and what we can do to the environment to kind of reduce those anxieties. Now, sort of moving on, we'll spend some time thinking about practical and home-based strategies that parents and carers could potentially put in place to support a child with a PDA profile. So the following list of strategies aims to empower parents with practical tools to support PDA at home, reduce, hopefully, stress, and build positive relationships. So we'll be speaking about reducing daily battles, emotional regulation and co-regulation, building trust and connection, flexible routines and transitions, school and advocacy strategies, and also self-care for parents. So we'll jump right into it. So with reducing daily battles, what you want to think about here is sort of low demand and negotiation strategies. So thinking about your language adaptations with guidance from the person themselves on what language is most demanding versus what language is least demanding. If you're working with a pupil or it's your child, you will be aware of what some of those trigger languages and those trigger words are for that individual. So thinking about, if we're in sort of a negotiation battle, do we need to be saying those triggering words? How can we kind of adapt our language to make it a little bit more digestible for them? Also providing low demand spaces, again with guidance from the individual on what is low demand for them. And you could also do this through observations and from just knowing the child. So is there a space in the house or in the school that we know is a safe space for them and they can retreat to if things get a little bit overwhelming? Also thinking about reframing requests, to options whilst keeping the autonomy for the individual. There's a young boy that I currently support, and if I do want to place a demand and make a request, I kind of address it to the environment and I don't address it to the child themselves, because that can be really overwhelming. He has kind of clicked onto that. So, I might need to change my strategy there. But sometimes it's just thinking creatively about how we can maybe place that demand and make that request, but with keeping autonomy for that individual. So if we place a demand and they say no, then thanking them for being really honest and speaking up and saying what they want, and maybe saying, I'll just come back at a later time. Asking open-ended questions can work really well, because you're limiting the likelihood of them just saying yes or no. If they are saying no, then maybe they can speak more a little bit about it and open up a little bit more, so you can get a little bit more from that child. Or if you've got a child that is non-vocal and you're using sort of visuals, offering choices and having that option out there for them rather than picking the choice for them. And then always agreeing on an exit strategy and spaces to opt out to. So if a session in a classroom environment becomes too demanding, where can they opt out to? Are we offering them something that they really like doing to reduce the likelihood of behaviours of concern occurring? Is it that we're going to have a change of face, and that's kind of the exit strategy? So yeah, really thinking about what you're doing day to day to reduce those daily battles, particularly if you've got children with a PDA profile where they have those internal battles already that they may or may not be able to communicate. Thinking about how we can reduce those external battles is a really important factor. Now moving on to co-regulation to self-regulation. A lot of you might be sort of familiar with this already. We're sort of slightly touching on sort of our zones of regulation. Younger children in particular will need support to regulate their emotions, as they may be a little bit too young to understand the really big feelings that they're feeling. This can also be true in older children, particularly during times of crisis. And the term that we like to use for this is co-regulation. Now we sort of have 6 kind of stages of co-regulation that I'll speak to you through. And the first is to complete a self-check-in. So are you in a space where you can provide a calm presence for the individual? So you've maybe placed a demand, or you've accidentally become a trigger for that child. Are you in a space where you're calm to be able to kind of cope with the situation? If not, potentially taking the steps to regulate yourself first if you are able to. Now, this can be a bit easier said than done, and sometimes you are in an environment where there is no opportunity to think about your own emotions, and you're almost sort of feel like you're fighting fires a little bit. And my advice that I've sort of given to people in that moment is kind of fake it till you make it. So you've got all this anxiety going on within yourself because you're trying to support. Externally, if you can kind of fake that calm presence, but keep it in your mind that you do need to kind of have that time afterwards to maybe self-reflect and take some time for yourself after this is sort of time of crisis is also really important. But if you are able to kind of take the steps to kind of regulate yourself first, and that might be change of face, then definitely do that. Get close to your child and listen to them. Tell them that you're there for them. Let your child know that you want to understand in the best way that you can. Emphasize and validate what your child is sharing. So it can be really helpful to give examples of times where you felt a similar emotion. So if you've got a child who's feeling really upset and really angry because they have been sort of denied access to something, maybe giving an example of a time where you wanted something and you wasn't able to have it. But be mindful that your child is sort of in that space to kind of focus, but also they're still at the center of it and you're continuing to listen to them. Remind your child that you're there for them again. Offer affection in ways that's appropriate for them and with their consent. And then finally, ask if they would like to have space. Sometimes they just want time and space alone, and that's also okay if it is safe to do so. But then just reminding the child that you are still there for them. So it might be that they are in a room self-regulating, but you are stood just outside of the room, just keeping an eye on them to make sure that the environment is remaining safe for them. Then from learning to regulate emotions, that's a sort of skill that the child will develop and sort of understand ways to regulate themselves. And this sort of supports with, if we're thinking sort of mental health as a child gets older. So you want to look at those impulsive reactions and then think about an alternative. So We don't want to tell children that you can't be angry. We all get angry. It's very normal. It happens. So if you do have a child that might throw a puzzle piece on the floor, if it's not fitting and they're getting a little bit frustrated, what we want to do is, when they are in a calm space, so this is when they are happy, relaxed and engaged, this is your teaching opportunity. So we're practicing different strategies to help us feel calm. We're identifying what works for us. And then we're putting that into potentially a toolkit, which is almost like a bank of resources that you can pull from when your child is dysregulated. So what we want to do is to aid the child with this, and we can use the framework called Zones of Regulation. Now, on the Beyond Autism website, we do have a lot of resources that supports with zones of regulation in terms of understanding what it is, understanding how parents and professionals can support with zones of regulation. And we also have a bunch of downloadable resources if you do want to implement that. So definitely check that out after this webinar. This is what the zones of regulation kind of looks like. This is sort of usually put up in schools. So this visual might be familiar to a lot of children. But what we want to do is focus on collaboration. So we've got the 4 colours. I'll sort of give a quick example of a young boy that I did a piece of work with, and he found it really tricky to speak about his feelings, didn't like it. If you asked him how he was, he would always just say good, because he kind of worked out, if I say good, then there aren't going to be any follow-up questions and nobody's going to ask me anything else, which is very smart. But he really liked the outdoors. So we had an activity where I had 4 coloured cones, blue, green, yellow, red, and I gave scenarios. So he really liked Fortnite, and I know nothing about Fortnite. But what a scenario was, for example, how do you feel if you lose a game of Fortnite? And we were outside and he was running to all the different cones of how he would feel, of what zone he would be in based on those scenarios. And that was just a really lovely way for him to be introduced to zones of regulation and really be introduced to understanding his own emotions and what that means for him internally. Again, this is available on the Beyond Autism website and online for you to have a little bit of a deeper look at. Next, we've got building trust and connection, and we have a case study here. So Leo, which is a pseudonym, was diagnosed with autism at age 6. Leo's parents described him as controlling and emotionally unpredictable, particularly when faced with minor requests or transitions. Behaviour analysts worked with the family to help reduce perceived demands, enhancing autonomy and building safety and trust. So the key strategies included collaborating with Leo on his daily schedule, so using pictures and fun names for tasks. So we said toothbrush battle as opposed to brush teeth on his daily schedule. We gave Leo control over when and how things happened, and really gave him that autonomy in his day, again within reason and within context. And then we also implemented one-on-one time with Leo and a parent when he sort of picked what activity he wanted to do with them, and he kind of led the play in a very non-demanding context. So again, he had that autonomy and had that control. And that worked really well for him, and he was able to kind of build trust and connection with his parents, because he knows that in those contexts they listen to me, and if I want to play this game, then they are open and willing to play this game with me. So again, thinking back to that first point, very low demand. We then also need to think about flexible routines and transitions. So a PDA friendly day. Now, for some PDA children, this might not work. But thinking about those low pressure mornings, so avoiding strict routines and aiming for rhythm rather than structure. So if you've got a child who finds, breakfast might be very demanding for them, or going downstairs when they wake up in the morning, you could sort of script and say, I wonder if we have chocolate spread downstairs. And again, it's thinking about that language, and you will know, as parents, you will know your children best, and you'll kind of know what those keywords are and what those scripts look like. For some children, they really like that routine and structure, and they want things done at a set time, which is also okay. Indirect language, so attempting more indirect sentence structures. For example, some people wear socks on really cold days. Let's check what the weather is like today. If putting socks on, for example, is really demanding for that child. Incorporating special interests, whatever they are really into at that time, whatever they find really fun and engaging, really incorporating that into the activities as jumping points for conversation and activity. Offering choices and control, so empowering the individual to choose what, when, and how, again within context. So if they've got a piece of literacy work that they need to complete, it might be that we've got, you know, a now next board, and they get to choose at what point that they're going to do that literacy work. Again, it has to be within the remit of what's appropriate for that context. Keeping the environment calm is the final point here. So really reducing that sensory overload and emotional tension. Predictability helps, but flexibility is key. So if you are in a school where you've got sort of dimmer switches and things like that, thinking about, you know, maybe that could be the space where we retreat to, because we've got a little bit more of control to the sensory environment. If you've got pupils that have a sort of more general sensory sort of profile or a sensory diet, thinking about how we can incorporate that as well into the routine. Definitely speaking to OT and speech and language therapists if your child has access to those services, as they may be able to kind of help in terms of how we're communicating and how we're reducing those sort of daily day-to-day demands. Now we've got the sort of last bit with schools and advocacy, so working with educators. So as parents, carers, and families, really knowing your rights and keeping communication really open between the network. Sometimes, you know, we do see relationships kind of break down between school and home or other professionals. But then, if that's happened, then that's okay. These things do happen. People do have differences of opinions, but thinking about how we can, move forward with that and have that open communication between the network and how we can kind of collaborate as an interdisciplinary team in the best interest of that child. Document everything. As a parent, it can be overwhelming having documents from this place, that place, meetings, conversations. So really trying to just document everything and having things on file. Seeking external support, so medical professionals, advocacy groups. On the Beyond Autism website, we have an autism services directory. Feel free to have a look at that afterwards. All you have to do is put in your postcode. And let's say you're looking for parent groups because you don't have sort of a network of support around you. Just typing in parent groups and all parent groups in your area should crop up. So definitely check that out if you are looking for a particular service. And then finally, person-centered planning. Now, this is a tool, again, available on our website where it's sort of a downloadable document and you can fill it in as professionals on behalf of a child or co-fill it in with the individual. And it just touches on things that they like, things that they don't like, what's important to them, what's important for them, things that they want to achieve, people who are important to them. And it's essentially just a document that has a bit of a profile about that individual, and this is something that can be shared across the network. So if you've got lots of bits that you're doing at home that is working really well, this can be jotted down in that document and then shared across settings, so you've got that more sort of tangible tool for support. And then the last point in terms of parents is self-care. Just know that you are doing enough and you're doing great. Sometimes, you can experience that mental overload where your brain is kind of running a million miles an hour. Just try and give yourself space to rest, whether that's writing things down, using tracker apps or sort of alarms to remind yourself to do things. Again, I know, you might be thinking this is a lot easier said than done, but really just trying your best to, even if it's just take a little bit of time for yourself. So the quote that I really like to use is drink your tea when it's hot. So if there's one opportunity in the week where you can, you make your cup of tea and you can actually just sit down and drink it there and then, as opposed to you plan to have that moment, but then things happen, then you end up being rushed around and then your tea goes cold. So definitely try and connect with people. So again, with the service directory, find people, WhatsApp chats, that sort of stuff. And then the sort of micro self-care, which is sort of the drink your tea while it's hot quote. But again, just know that you all are doing amazing, as parents and professionals, and it's all about just having that professional network and all of us working together. Now, some couple of last bits. We've got 5 minutes left, so I'll try to whiz through this. For clinical and educational sort of strategies for professionals, we're going to be touching on building low demand environments, crisis prevention, MDT collaboration, individualized plans, and then best practice. So with sort of the low demand and high engagement environments, what we want to do is work with, not against PDA. So if we're just thinking, if we look at that top example there, thinking about the classroom, what might be traditionally a task potentially in a classroom is write a paragraph about your weekend. But if we want to make that a little bit more PDA friendly, what we might say is pick one thing from your weekend and tell it as a comic strip or a voice note, or let's do it as a secret mission. So you are placing that demand, but again, we're doing it in a way that's digestible for the individual, more functional and more fun. If we are going to get the result by being a little bit more creative, then we definitely want to do that. Again, if we're in sort of a therapy session, instead of saying we're going to talk about emotions, if you've got people that love superheroes, let's talk about superheroes and, let's draw our own superheroes and give our superhero a different feeling. And, the superhero can be the same color as a particular zone of regulation, and just getting really creative that way. In clinical settings, potentially doing quizzes and just co-producing and co-designing quizzes just to make it a little bit more fun and engaging. Developing individualized support plans, so just having that PDA awareness. So what is the profile? We've been speaking about some sort of general characteristics and things that we might see in a PDA profile, but it's going to look different for every single child. Do we have a document where we can, have all of that in there? For example, the person-centered plan. We're defining the why of the behavior. What is happening before and what is happening after the behavior. Why is this a really high demand environment for that individual? What makes a low demand environment? What's working, what's not working, how we can be flexible within a school environment. What is the remit? What does flexibility look like? Is it that you've got a pupil that's in year 6 and is potentially sitting SATs? You've got a year 11, doing GCSEs, whatever that may look like. What is within the remit and what are those boundaries? And we're being really clear about that. Always thinking about your co-regulation strategies and just emphasizing on connection over correction. So we're just building that network and we're really trying to understand the individual. Thinking about trauma-informed care. We won't go into this sort of too much, but hopefully every child that you're supporting has sort of this sort of plan and you've got that history. I think really understanding, skipped, my apologies. Thinking about the history of that child. So it might be, we're looking at what those warning signs are for that child. Is it that they withdraw and before you see a behavior of concern? What does it look like when they are in times of crisis? And what does that recovery look like? So again, it's, speaking to parents and understanding, has there been a difficult period of time at home? That might filter through into that child's behavior in school. So again, we're thinking about the sort of contingency. We're looking at everything as a sequence, what's happening before, what's happening during, and what's happening after. And what we want to do is, establish all our proactive strategies to reduce the likelihood of that behavior occurring again in the future. Again, we've touched on this already a little bit, but the interdisciplinary networking team. So as a professional, thinking about what's going to work best for the network. Is it weekly phone calls? Are we uploading updates onto school online forums? Is it email chains, school diary that goes in a child's bag that we're transferring from home and school and we're just writing notes in? Chatting at the school gates, it might be, a pupil has a TA and just handing a bit of information over on how the day has been. Weekly MDT meetings, sharing relevant reports, and having all the professionals in the network invited to relevant meetings. What I find useful is, if we kind of agree, once a month we're going to have a check-in, just sending calendar invite for, a term, for example. So it's in everybody's calendars. And then it's just, everybody can sees their calendars on a day-to-day and you just join. So thinking about how we can kind of connect parents and professionals to have that collaborative support. And then the last point is just research and best practice. So really staying informed and staying on relevant sites with PDA research. So again, PDA Society is a really good website. There's a lot of information on there. Having a look at our services directory in our resource hub, because we do have a lot of resources that do support a child with PDA, a child with autism, or just some sort of general support strategies as well. And then I think that's it. Thank you so much for listening. The end bit was a little bit rushed there. I will take one question because I can see it's already 12:59, but please do type your questions in the chat and I will sort of send out some email responses at the end, but we'll do one quick one. So how to integrate a child who is all day in a low demand room one-to-one into being more part of the school. In regards to that, I would say definitely think about what the transition is going to look like. So it's going to be a really big demand getting them to access a classroom. So we can start off really small. So it might be that we are going to deliver something to a particular classroom. And it might be that we start off where, you know, all the kids are at lunch, for example, you're in your low demand environment with your TA, and we're going to deliver a piece of paper to a classroom where there are no pupils in there. But then it's just an opportunity to access a different area of the school without the expectation of having to speak to anybody and have to, you know, have that dialogue with anybody. It might be that, you know, you're in your low demand environment and we're just going next door. Let's go take this book next door, and really building it up into sort of how big that transition is going to look like. So definitely have baby steps and definitely set a transition plan of what that will look like, you know, what tools and resources you have available and how you can build that up. And it might be that they only, you know, were trying this strategy with their preferred member of staff. We have lots of reinforcers that we have available. Does the child like bubbles? It might be that we're blowing bubbles down the corridor and then we're blowing bubbles back because, you know, we want them to just access one corridor a little bit more frequently. It might be that we drop a pen as we're walking into a room and, you know, oh, help me pick up the pen. So just making it very naturalistic sometimes is best because then it doesn't feel like a demand and it doesn't feel necessarily like a really big task. But I see your question here. I can pop some strategies in an email for you, but definitely do pop down your questions. We have some references here. And then last slide is if you found it sort of useful and you want to sort of reach out for a free consultation, please do scan this QR code here. Our next Lunch and Learn will be on Tuesday, the 3rd of June at 12:30 with Matt Malone, who is the Head of Outreach and Training Services. And he'll be speaking on his experience on building partnerships between local authorities and schools to reduce exclusions and improve outcomes for SEND learners. That is all from me today. Thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to seeing your emails and having a little bit more of an in-depth dialogue with you all. Thank you and have a lovely afternoon.